So, today we're going to dive into a pretty provocative idea about the American Constitution. The basic argument is that the founders' view of human nature wasn't just, some small influence. It was the actual blueprint for the government they built. Let's break down what that means.
And it all really comes down to this one huge question. Is a government's job to try and perfect people, or is its job to restrain them? According to the source we're looking at today, how you answer that question changes absolutely everything about what you think a government should do.
Okay, so to really get a grip on this, we've got to look at the core conflict. The source we're examining frames this whole thing as two completely opposite views on the very purpose of government.
So on one side, you've got this idea of utopianism. This is the belief that government can actually perfect humanity, because deep down, people are capable of being totally selfless. But then, on the other side, we have what the source calls the founders' view. That government exists precisely because humanity is flawed, or fallen, and that makes its main job restraining evil.
All right, so if that's the big conflict, how does this source material push back against that utopian idea? Well, it breaks it all down with some really sharp questions and answers.
And the first question it asks is a big one for sure. Why does it seem like these utopian political systems always end up failing?
So the argument here is that these systems just don't work because they deny a pretty basic concept: sin. They're built on the hope that if you just get the conditions exactly right, people will naturally do good. But, as this source claims, that completely ignores the reality of human nature. Things like greed, pride, and the thirst for power.
So, of course, that leads to the next big question the source tackles. What happens when a government decides it's not just going to restrain evil, but it's going to start redefining what is good and what is evil?
And according to this source, the result is, well, it's pretty dangerous. When a government starts redefining morality, absolute truths get thrown out and replaced by raw political power. The argument is that this shift always leads to injustice and eventually to tyranny.
Okay, so if that's the core belief, how in the world does that turn into an actual blueprint for a government? Let's take a look at how this viewpoint sees it baked right into the design of the Constitution.
The source we're looking at really pins its whole argument on this one verse from the Bible, Romans 3:23. This idea that everyone is imperfect, everyone falls short, is presented as the theological bedrock for how the founders viewed human nature.
And this idea feeds into a concept the source calls biblical anthropology. Basically, it's the view that people are, inherently flawed or fallen, and because of that, we need restraint and external checks, not some idealistic system designed to make us perfect.
So here's the really interesting part: how this belief is said to flow right into the structure of government. It's like a domino effect. You start by acknowledging that human nature is fallen. That automatically means you need a limited government. And how do you do that? You divide its power. And how do you make sure that division sticks? You build in systems of accountability. It's laid out as a direct, logical line from a single belief to the entire government structure.
Now, this source doesn't just stop at analyzing the past. Nope. It wraps up with a kind of prescription for today, a specific call to action that's based on this entire worldview. The plan of action it lays out has three main parts. First, it says to reject any politician or party that claims they can be a savior. Second, teach kids about personal responsibility and accountability. And third, support laws that are designed specifically to restrain evil, which goes right back to that core philosophy. And that leaves us with a really big question to chew on, something at the very heart of this whole discussion. Just how much should any one particular view of human nature be allowed to shape a government that's supposed to be for everyone?